Be sure you've re-listened to our original interview we did with our friend Eric Carter-Landin prior to listening to this interview. The original episode goes into great detail to cover the case of Eric's little brother, Jacob, and for more than 3 decades, his case has remained neglected. Because we referred to the alleged perpetrator as John in the previous episode, we've continued to do so in this episode as well. But Eric has released new details on his own podcast, and we encourage you to listen to his coverage. To learn more about the projects we discuss in this interview, be sure to check the show notes. This is The Fall Line. We have a lot to talk about in terms of your work, what you've done, what you've accomplished. But first, I really want to get into discussing what's happened in Jacob's case since April of 2022. At that point, you'd gotten in touch with the Attorney General involved. And last time you told us, in April of 2021, that the AG had agreed to reopen Jacob's case. And when we spoke, you've been waiting to hear the results of that investigation.
Thanks for having me on again. It's awesome to be here. And the investigation, I think, is probably a strong word to describe what the Attorney General's office did. So we'll fast forward to January of this year. We had received an email from our family advocate at the Attorney General's office, and they had asked us for a meeting, my mom and I. We were like, sure, absolutely. They said, well, we can do this by Zoom. And we are like, that works. That's great. My mom lives an hour away. So, we could do that. And they said, actually, we'd rather do this in person. So we'd like for you guys to come into the office. And I said, okay, well, my schedule's kind of crazy. So here's some days that I'm available. Like, let's try to make it work. And for me, it wasn't an easy task because my mom's car wasn't working at the time. And so I had to drive 75 miles to pick her up, and then 75 miles back to Albuquerque, and then, repeat that again to take her home. So in my mind, I took it as a good sign that they were asking for an in-person meeting, because I thought perhaps if they had bad news, they would just send us an email and say, hey, we have bad news. Sorry, go on with your life or whatever. But so my mom and I guess, really had a lot of hope hinging on that meeting. We were very anxious and feeling like we were going to hear some good news. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. So we're brought into the meeting, and immediately I can tell that just the tone of the meeting is not positive. They start to talk about, well, this is an old case, and there's a lot of information that's missing. There's a lot of evidence that's missing. And so, we thought we would try to look at it again and see if there was anything that happened or anything that could be done. And so in the room, there were 2 attorneys for the Attorney General's office. There was an investigator and our victim's advocate. And they said unfortunately, they were unable to overcome some big issues with the case, and that they weren't going to be able to proceed with prosecution or with moving forward in any meaningful way. And in that moment, a lot of feelings came out for my mom and I, and we got very emotional, as you can imagine. I would probably go so far as to say we started pretty much yelling at them, which is not something that I'm proud of, but in the moment, all of the emotions just kind of overwhelmed us. So I said, the state of New Mexico failed Jacob, and it failed my mom, and it failed me, and it's doing that again. It was a long conversation, and at first I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that they did a thorough investigation. And so I was like, a little bit apologetic, like, hey, I'm sorry that we got so emotional, but you have to understand, like, this has been 37 years for us, and we've been fighting so hard for something to happen, and you were our last hope, right? So now that is gone. And I think we left that meeting in a pretty good space until we were being walked out of the meeting room and into the lobby, where we were informed by our victim's advocate that there was a beautiful sculpture of a tree in the lobby, and she wanted us to do a plaster cast of our handprints and write Jacob's name on the hand, because they want to show the community that they're there for them. So as my mom and I are talking about this, heading back to her house, we start to get angrier by the minute. And we then decide, like, okay, no, this is not okay. Like, there's something off here. So I said, I'm going to request their records. I'm going to ask for their investigative notes. I'm going to ask for the supplemental reports. I'm going to ask for either transcripts or recordings of the people that they talked to and the interviews that they had, not really knowing what I was going to get and not really knowing what that was going to lead to. They gave me 3 pages of documents. Two of them I already had, and then one of them was just like an additional note from the medical investigator that I didn't have. And they said, we're going to consider this matter closed unless you disagree. So I wrote back and I said, I very much disagree. This is not what I asked for. I asked for your notes. I want to see who you talked to, when you talked to them, and what they said. So then they sent me back my case file that I gave them and tried to say that they had completed everything at that point.
Ultimately, Eric went through 3 rounds of requests and multiple email exchanges. He wanted the new investigative notes taken once Jacob's case was reopened to see who was interviewed, what new steps were taken, and how thoroughly the case was reviewed before the decision not to move forward was made.
Then they turned over another, I think, 6 or 7 pages to me. There were the notes of the investigator that allegedly investigated the case. And there was red flags immediately when I started reading it. Many of the details in the summary that he provided were incorrect. And not just like a little bit incorrect, missing the point on many of the things that were in the case file even. And even going so far as to referring to Miss Juanita Gordon as Mr. Gordon, which is a small thing, but it was piling up with all of the other issues that were there in that summary. So immediately I'm like, okay, this is not good. This is not a good sign. And as I read through it, I learned that if everything that they gave me was everything they had, that they only talked to one person over the course of almost 3 years. So I wrote back and I said, I'm having a really hard time understanding the information that you provided me because it's either severely lacking a lot of detail or what you're saying to me is that you really didn't investigate this because a lot of this information is not correct.
Eric's biggest issue was the apparent lack of interviews conducted. Based on the notes he received, only one person was spoken to, and that was a medical legal professional, not anyone directly involved in the case as a victim, a witness, or a possible suspect.
Why wouldn't you interview John? He's confessed twice already. And they wrote back and said, we didn't see any evidentiary value in talking to anybody else.
As you heard a few minutes ago, another issue Eric said they brought up was the concept of an alibi. Namely, he tells us that his mom was said to have given one to Jacob's alleged killer. But that doesn't make sense to him based on the definition of what an alibi actually is.
So, essentially the alibi they're talking about is when my mom is being told by this person that I was hurting Jacob. And then when the police asked her about it, she said, this is what he said to me. There really wasn't anything in that. I mean, I guess if you are trying to try this trial in your mind and you're like, I have to present this to a jury, the jury's probably going to question my mom's interactions with the police and what she said. That's fine. I still don't think that should stop you from investigating this case.
Just listening to that absolutely blows my mind. After having you really lay out the facts for me 2 years ago and following you this entire time, even someone who took a cursory glance at that file would know where you were when things happened. If I remember, they asked your mom some general kind of character questions, which would not, do you think this could happen? Well, maybe, I don't know. I don't think so. That's not an alibi.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. And, I kept pushing back. I'm like, this is not an alibi. You need to stop calling it that. You can call it, questionable things that my mom might have said, things that cause people to pause, sure. Is the defense going to latch onto that? Absolutely. But if you're any kind of prosecutor, you can prepare for that, right? Like, I don't know, maybe talk to my mom. They didn't interview my mom. They didn't interview me. They didn't interview my grandmother. They didn't interview anybody connected to this case other than the supervisor of the medical investigator at the time, who, of course, doesn't remember anything.
Where does that leave you and your family in terms of what, if anything, can be pursued for Jacob?
Yeah. We are obviously distraught, right? Like, I think we've spent the last few months kind of picking up the pieces of our broken hearts and trying to gain the gumption to move forward.
I noticed that one thing you did earlier this year was to revive a campaign that you did really early on as a family creator, which was to do 10 Days of Jacob. Can you talk about that a little bit and why you decided to revive that?
Yeah. So that's actually what caused the Attorney General to pay attention to the case the first time we did the 10 Days of Jacob. It led to the district attorney in Socorro County turning the case over. And that was the only way that really could get any kind of movement in his case. So I'm very, very grateful for everyone that participated in that the first time. The second time we did it was in response to all of this interaction that we had with the Department of Justice and, our feelings of just being basically told to go away. So we decided to try it again to see if that would help to get the Attorney General's office to pay attention. Because one thing that I know about Raul Torres, the Attorney General, is that he is very concerned with his electability. And my hope was that it would cause some pressure to be built on the office to make him want to try to do something beyond what they had already done. I think it definitely let them know that people are paying attention and that people care about Jacob's case and people are listening. But I don't know that it was enough to get Raul's attention or to make him act. But I think my mom and I really want to continue fighting, as difficult as it is, as much as we want to, like, I don't want to say give up, but you know, there was a moment of like just feeling defeated and it kind of comes and goes. It's hard to want to move forward after something like this happens. I think we will get there. I think we'll get to the point where we can start really getting out there again and trying to push it forward. But emotionally and just in terms of our morale, it hasn't been the same fire that we had under us before, because I do feel like the rug was somewhat pulled out from under us. So um, I think we'll get back up, we'll dust ourselves off, and we'll start moving forward. Some of the things that we're looking to do is to get some national media attention. We also want to hire a private investigator. We did raise some money to do that. We have it. We're ready to use it. I've not had very much luck finding somebody who will, first of all, let me pay them to do this. Everyone that I've talked to so far said, "Oh, I won't charge you." And I'm like, I want somebody to take this case and work it. So like we have the money. And so when every time they say they won't charge me, then they just kind of don't follow through, or move forward. So I think that's something that we definitely want to explore. We're looking at potential legal recourse as well.
We talked about whether Eric felt pressure to immediately know what's next in his campaign when he's still processing the blow of finding out that further official action won't be taken in Jacob's case.
I don't think that it's pressure when people ask what's next. I think what that says to me is they care. And so I don't take it as a pressure, and I have no problem saying, hey, I think we're going to have next steps at some point, but right now we're in like grief mode. We're processing our feelings and we need some time. And I have said that to people when they've asked me that, because I think it's real and it's honest, right? So they're coming from a good place. And, I definitely don't want to disappoint the people that are invested in Jacob's case. But I think that there needs to be space for mental health and for grieving hope that we had. And that's not to say that we don't have hope. It's just we have to find a different avenue to pursue now.
So I know that at least way back when we talked in April of 2022, there was a lot of information you were holding back in Jacob's case, and for a really good reason, because you were waiting for hopeful prosecution. And I know that you're feeling differently in terms of both that hope and also in terms of how you're processing this information. As a family member and an advocate and a creator that does work in the true crime space, and you're dealing with a case that has not been resolved but is being treated as closed.
Well, people who don't know me probably don't know that I have a very short temper, and I can be a little bit of a hothead about things. I can also be very stubborn. I call it tenacity, but it's stubbornness. So I think at this point, I'm all bets are off in my mind. Um, the Attorney General was our last stop here on this kind of justice train. And with them closing the case and really saying that there's no hope for prosecution, I think I'm kind of changing my approach to the case completely. I've already named the suspect, and so that was one big thing that I've been holding back for a long time, and I've been very diligent to not do that. Now all bets are off. I don't have any cause to not be completely forthcoming about everything. And so really, I think why I'm doing that, there's a number of reasons. I really am hoping that if there are other victims of this person that need help fighting for justice for what he did to them, that they would come forward. And my mom and I would be more than happy to help them in whatever way that we could. I'm not saying I've given up on any hope that there will be a trial. There could be a trial, and I potentially could be jeopardizing that in the future. But at this point, it's not going to go forward unless there's more information that comes out. So the other side of it is maybe there's somebody who remembers something, who saw something, who heard something. Maybe there's somebody he talked to. Maybe that, there could be information out there that we don't even know exists on the case. And I think that by opening it up now that really there's not any hope without that information could give us potential avenues to move forward.
Has this experience in any way changed or maybe even just informed the way that you're approaching and covering and advocating for cases in New Mexico?
I think that it is extremely personal the way families choose to advocate for their loved ones. And I would never believe that I am the know-all, end-all, be-all in that scenario. I think that every situation is different and everybody responds differently to things. If I could go back and tell myself things, I think it would be to go hard from the beginning, although that could probably backfire, right? Then nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to work with me because I'm just like a giant jerk who is just a pain in their neck. Or is that what it takes? Like, do you have to be the squeaky wheel to get somebody to care? And it's awful. It's awful that we even have to sit here and have this conversation. It's awful that families have to sit there and think, like, what is the best way for me to do this? Like, should I be chill? Should I just follow the process? Should I just step in line and, do everything the way it's supposed to be done? Or should I, go out there and start shouting from the rooftops and be a thorn in their side? So I do think I can provide some of my experience. In my experience, this is what I've done, but I'd never want to say that families should do something a certain way. I think that it's a very personal journey, and I can only share what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me. That doesn't mean that's what's going to work for you or not work for you. But I could tell you about the things that we encountered along the way. So I do think that there is some of that there. That's definitely a route that I want to take, is really, let's listen to some success stories. Let's listen to some failure stories of other family advocates that are out there. so that we can all learn, because we all could learn from each other. I think that there are lots of family members out there that can provide valuable experience and hope and strength and understanding like nobody else could provide. So I think that that's a beautiful opportunity to really get that strength in numbers kind of building up and creating a community where people can support each other and not feel so alone, because this is a lonely journey. And while it's not true that, nobody else is going through it, it does feel like that sometimes.
Trust and Will is an online estate planning service. Visit trustandwill.com for details.
Trust and Will.
My dad and I were always close, but some things we just didn't talk about, like his will. After he was gone, we found out he didn't have one, and it created a lot of stress during a time of grief.
Creating a will can be hard to think about, but avoiding it can lead to greater difficulty for the people you love. That's why Trust and Will makes estate planning simple. Create a will online in as little as 30 minutes.
Now, I have a will in place to make sure my loved ones are protected. With Trust and Will, it was easy and affordable, and I got peace of mind knowing my wishes are clear.
Trust and Will.
Get 20% off when you visit trustandwill.com/future. That's trustandwill.com/future to get 20% off. trustandwill.com/FUTURE.
Another major shift in Eric's life and his mother's has been the establishment of their new nonprofit, Angels Voices Silence No More. We talked about the inspiration for their organization and what he hopes to accomplish.
So, like I said, I am constantly challenging myself to do more. And it's something that drives my husband crazy because he's constantly challenging me to do less. And I keep upping the ante on him and on everything else. So Angel's Voices Silenced No More really kind of came out of that questioning that I constantly am doing to myself of what else can be done, what needs to be done, what isn't here that needs to be here. And so my mom and I actually had this conversation a little bit after we had recorded the first episode about Jacob together, and she actually came up with a name. It just kind of came out of her mouth, and I was like, wow, that's really powerful, because it does feel like a lot of our angels, our family members who have been murdered are silenced, and we want to stop that from happening. So this nonprofit is solely based in New Mexico. I do have aspirations to bring it to a national level, and if anybody wants to open chapters in other states, reach out to me. But essentially what we do is we are a granting organization that grants funds to family members to help them in their fight for justice or their quest for answers. And we really are focused on, as much as we think that families need during these situations, we pay for things like funeral expenses, counseling fees. We pay for billboards, for social media ads. We'll pay for private investigations. We'll pay for attorneys to help them with their cases, DNA testing, search and rescue supplies, funding searches, anything that is going to help them in their quest for justice. We do pay direct to vendor, so we're not just handing out money to family members who say that they need money for something. We actually would ask them for an invoice or a quote, and then we would cover those costs directly. So we try to make sure that we're being good stewards of the donations that we're receiving, and that it's going to, as much of it as possible, is going to the families directly. My goal, my own personal goal, is to keep it at like 90% of the money that we bring in going out. I don't know if that's feasible. We don't have any hired staff right now. It's fully volunteer board only. So we're a working board. We're all pulling the ship together. And so we're going to try to keep the costs as low as possible so that we can be as impactful as possible in the community. And always comes back to taking away that sense of loneliness and hopelessness, or at least trying to alleviate some of that so that the families can focus and put their energy into fighting for justice or searching for answers without the pressure of all of these other things that are part of it that people don't think about when you're trying to imagine what it's like to fight for justice. We have a couple things coming up. So July 1st, I'm going to officially announce, because that's Jacob's birthday, we're doing a blessing shower for families in need. So we were going to do it in person, but the logistics of it and my schedule and everybody else's schedules, we couldn't make it work. So we're doing a virtual baby shower. And essentially what we've done is we've created an Amazon wish list. We also will accept, donations that are not from Amazon if people want to shop somewhere else, even if there's like Etsy stuff. But we want to collect diapers, bottles, baby wipes, all the necessities. And then we'll be taking them to domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, and to any other families that are in need for those supplies. So we want Jacob's legacy to be a legacy of good things that are done in his name and not so much of a focus on the horrible things that happened to him. And I'm really excited about that baby shower. I think we're going to have an opportunity to make a bigger impact in the community and really, do something a little bit different that isn't directly related to justice, but it is a form of justice, because I think that there are a lot of people out there that are in need. And it makes me happy and it makes my mom happy that we're able to do this in Jacob's name.
So, on the note of other projects you have going to connect people and help people, you and some of your colleagues, which is a really formal word because they are also my friends, have decided to launch another big project. And it's slated for next year. And it's called AdvocacyCon. So I would love for you to tell our audience more about that, why you feel it's needed, and also what attendees can expect.
Absolutely. So I want to just be very clear from the beginning that it's Advocacy Conference, not convention. This isn't going to be a convention. This is going to be a conference. And this, again, is one of those ideas that, as I'm constantly asking myself, what else can be done, is something that I feel like is missing in, I don't even want to say the true crime space. I would just say in the advocacy space. There are advocacy conferences. They're very broad in the scopes of what they do. I think we're being a little bit more targeted in how we're approaching this. And it is the first multi-day conference specifically focused on advocating for murder victims and the missing. So the whole goal really is to ignite a spark of hope for families that are out there looking for answers or fighting for justice. And what we want to do is bring together experts in the field of advocacy, whether they be private investigators, DNA organizations that are doing genetic genealogy, nonprofits that assist families that are out there fighting for justice or looking for answers, search and rescue experts, like everybody that has anything to do with advocating for justice, to come together, connect with these families that are actively looking for answers, and not just family advocates, but just any advocates that are out there trying to get answers on cases, connecting them with these people, putting them in the same room so that they can have conversations. In a perfect world, I see families coming up to lawyers that are there and asking them to help them review their cases and to give them advice on who to talk to or where to go or things that they can do. Private investigators that are there to potentially answer questions that they may have. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to bring in people, and we are bringing in people like Sarah Turney, like Julie Murray, to talk about what it means to get media to pay attention to your family's case and what it takes and what are the things that they can do practically to get that ball rolling, because that's not an easy thing for somebody who isn't media trained to do. So having somebody sharing their best practices of the things that they have done to get their family's case out there is beyond valuable, in my opinion. We're going to have Beth Holloway there. She's going to be our keynote speaker There's going to be so many incredible speakers. You're going to be there. We're going to have so many people there to just provide incredible information. I think it's going to be an amazing weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. If we can get our way, we're going to have therapy dog there. We want to have therapists there as well for the families as they're kind of going through this process. Make sure that they have space to be able to, deal with the emotions that are coming up as they're going through this weekend, because I do think it's going to be a very emotional weekend for everybody. We want to try to make it as safe as possible for them to be able to have those conversations. And so I'm excited about it. I hope that the attendees are excited about it. Potential attendees are excited about it. If you're not a family advocate, you can definitely come. If you want to learn about advocacy, if you want to learn about how you can get involved and do it in a productive way that doesn't hurt the case, then we would absolutely invite you to come. This isn't a podcast conference. We will have podcast creators and YouTube creators there, but specifically they will be there because they help families and because they want to help cases.
One thing that struck me about it too, as a conference, is that when y'all asked me to come, and I'm coming to speak about working on unidentified persons cases and connecting with the families of the identified when they're identified, is that someone who's coming as my guest is Anne Marie, who's the sister of Susan Menard Lund, who's formerly known as Ina Jane Doe. And when I told her that the conference is in Indianapolis, close to where she lives, she was so excited. And she said that the reason why she was excited is because she had not had the chance to connect with another family who'd gone through a similar experience. She can talk to her own family, but she's the case lead in her family. And she just simply had not had the chance to speak to anyone else who'd gone through anything like, remotely similar outside of her small bubble. And that is what she's most excited about. So
that makes me feel good, because that's where I think the magic is going to happen with AdvocacyCon. Those moments of pulling somebody aside and saying, hey, can we talk about what you've done to move your case forward? I have some questions for you. Like the value of that. I've been very blessed and fortunate to have Sarah Turney and Julie Murray and John Palmer and so many incredible family advocates that are out there doing the work to ask those questions. And so I know that there's so much power in that. And I think that that is going to be the biggest impact that we're going to see from this conference. And I'm beyond excited. I think it's going to be incredible. It's a game changer. It's a groundbreaking thing that we're doing. It's never been done before. And I'm excited for the future and to see where this goes, because I think that it could, again, create more impact. And that's constantly what I'm trying to do.
So we hear the word advocate more and more and more in true crime spaces, which I think can be a good thing for sure. But I wonder if people really think about the responsibility that that word entails, because there's a lot of it. What do you personally, and I think this can be on every level, as a family member, as a brother, as a creator, as an advocate, what do you want people to actually understand about advocacy? What defines it for you? What should it be? What should it not be?
Oof, coming at me with the hard questions tonight.
It's right at the end.
Right at the end. Yeah. Advocacy for me is speaking up in the face of injustice. And I think that the word does get thrown around quite a bit, especially because it's now becoming popular or cool to be ethical in true crime. And I think advocacy is kind of the antithesis of the unethical side of true crime. So from a true crime creator perspective, the responsibility that I see for advocacy is creating awareness and asking for calls to action for these cases, and just giving a platform to the families that are out there trying to raise awareness on their cases. Advocacy as a brother, as a family member of a murder victim, is like, it's the same, right? Speaking out against injustice in my brother's case and holding everybody who is responsible accountable and calling them to account. I think you see that kind of advocacy everywhere, right? I think that Martin Luther King is an example of a great advocate who was speaking out against injustice. So that's kind of how I see it in my mind. Of course, there's like formal advocacy as well, where you get certified. And definitely, I think it's a great thing to do. It's not something that I've done yet, but probably something I will do in the future. But it can take a lot of shapes and forms, right? Advocacy could be as simple as signing a petition. It could be as simple as sharing a post of a missing person. It could be as simple as calling your representative and asking them to change a law that is hindering justice. So there's just so many different layers to it. And I think that it could potentially get a little bit cheapened as it gets tossed around a lot and used, and people just claim to be advocates when, maybe they're not really doing anything, or they're causing more harm than help. But true crime has an opportunity to do a lot of good. The media has an opportunity to do a lot of good. Both of those industries, neither of them take advantage of that all the time. Sometimes they choose, clickbait, profits, whatever, over that. I try to be cautious with using that word. The way I see is really specifically focus on action that lead assistance or hope or help for these people that are out there fighting.
We asked Eric to tell us about everything else that he's working on right now.
Well, like I said, I collect things to do. I'm proud of my collection of things to do. I'm going to hang on to my collection of things to do. No. So I have AdvocacyCon. I have Angels Voices Silence No More. I have True Consequences podcast, which is based in New Mexico, and it's part of Angels Voices now. So all the money that is made from that show goes directly to Angels Voices Silence No More, directly to helping families in New Mexico fight for justice. I'm also now officially the host of The Murder in My Family, which is a podcast that focuses on family interviews. And I've really put a huge focus on providing that platform to families that are out there looking for answers. I'm not going to say no to a family that just wants to tell their story, but my primary focus is really using that platform to help those families that need it the most. And so I think that it is a little bit of a tone change, just because I provide the understanding and the experience of somebody who's going through it as well. And then I also have a podcast that I do with my friend Charlie called Crime Lines and Consequences, Charlie from Crime Lines, where we twice a month we talk about a case together and we discuss it and the implications from just different ways of looking at it, right? So sometimes we talk about how social media affects unsolved cases. And then we also bring a guest in once a month, usually a friend of ours, to talk about something.
Eric, thank you so much for coming on to update us, although we had wished for better news. I do want the audience to know they'll be hearing much more about Eric and his projects throughout the season, as we will be making donations to Eric's nonprofit and encouraging the audience to do the same. So, Eric, thanks again for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be speaking with you again soon.
Thank you.
When this episode airs, the baby shower drive will be live, and we hope you'll join us in fulfilling the wish list of expectant parents in need in New Mexico. You can find information on participating in our show notes and on our social media, as well as the social media for Angels Voices Silence No More. We're donating a portion of our ad sales for our next season, which begins in August, in support of AVSNM, and we hope you'll join us in supporting Eric's new nonprofit. You can find a link in our show notes. You'll also hear more about AdvocacyCon, which we'll tell you about throughout the season on our episodes. There are links for that in the show notes too, plus all of Eric's projects and Jacob's website. If you know of a case that should be covered on the fall line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes that we care about. If you try out the products that we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show on your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case in the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified persons cases, is out everywhere now as a hardcover, ebook, and an audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more in the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our family therapy fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on our show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research assistance by Brian Waters. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.